Let's cross now to Ben Farrell, who's Global CEO at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. He joins us now from Oxford in the UK. Welcome to TRT World, Ben. Now, with short-term anxiety currently sitting so high, are global supply chains permanently becoming more expensive to manage?
Hi, there are a few things I can point to in the sort of short term. You can point to freight costs, which obviously have inflated as the competition for freight and the redesign of some supply chains has been obvious in the past few months, and also insurance costs and the like. So you could easily conclude the answer to your question, your excellent question, is indeed yes, it's likely to be the case. But I wanted to point to some more profound changes that I'm seeing around the world as people redesign supply chains. So it's probably fair to say for the last 4 decades, globalization has taken place and supply chains have been rather designed for efficiency and optimizing cost. But I think in light of the last, say, 2 years with the level of disruption, or perhaps post the war in Ukraine where it started, and then we saw changes in tariffs and latterly, I suppose, the war in Iran, I think organizations are now really redesigning what I'm beginning to call their supply webs to plan in more resilience. And some of that will inevitably add some cost to it, but also as part of that, what we're seeing is increased regionalization. So perhaps there's some more what in supply chain terms is called nearshoring, where the supply chains or supply webs are in fact shortened. So there's a combination of factors at play. But my guess is that the answer to your question is yes, but probably not at the heightened levels of the recent months. Things are indeed improving in the sense that we've seen a sort of reduction in the level of anxiety, as you pointed to earlier, which I hope bodes well for the coming months.
And if 75% of procurement teams are worried about disruptions in the Middle East, can global shipping stocks avoid potential earnings hits this year?
Well, based on the last few months, I think that it's possible to avoid them. My judgment is, in fact, the demand is as high as it's ever been. People are redesigning their supply chains, as I said, and looking for a more resilient approach. So I think it is totally possible to imagine a circumstance where actually the stocks are quite resilient in these circumstances. I've seen a number of instances where ports have become increasingly productive, where shipping lines have really redesigned and worked very well with their customers on thinking about how they navigate the circumstances everybody's facing. So my judgment is actually it presents quite a good opportunity for shipping lines and organizations to respond in conjunction with the organizations they work with to make the whole supply web much more resilient in the future.
And as we've just heard, cyber concerns have also jumped. How much is this actually weighing on both the broader supply chain and corporations?
Yeah, it was interesting to see that risk reappear in the top few concerns that organizations globally have. Of course, our Pulse survey, is a global survey, and we have members across 180 different countries and offices all around the world. So what it is interesting to see is now a global perspective around cyber risk emerging. It had receded in the last year or so, but it is interesting that it has come to the fore once again. And organizations will, nobody will be in a position where they haven't to some extent invested in cyber protection and risk management already, but it does present the spectre of having to think about the threat now and how that is changing and the necessity to respond. I was interested in your article earlier about artificial intelligence and what does that mean now in terms of how organizations think about their overall resilience, cyber risk management and the like. And we've definitely seen instances in the last 12 months of some very significant cyber activity across supply chains, both physical and digital. And I would point obviously to the digital supply chain in this circumstances, the potential for disruption as organizations are increasingly vast webs of lots of organizations working together in a digital environment. So to some extent, the threat is, managing the growth in organizations as a sort of big ecosystem of lots of organizations working together. And with that comes vulnerability. So it's a case of continual management, and that will probably likely to necessitate some degree of further investment, and certainly some degree of careful thought and diligence around the organizations with whom you work.
Ben Farrell from the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, thank you very much for joining us.